I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover, and to the army I did go, for to roam the world all over. I was a soldier stout and bold, I never once was wounded, till I fell in love with a pretty fair maid, and she has me sorely wounded. Fa-la-da-da-da-da-da-day, and a fa-la-da-da-da-da-day, oh. Fa-la-da-da-da-da-da-day, and a fa-la-da-da-da-day, oh. First thing you got to do is, of course, decide the tempo you want the song to be at. I wanted it to be fairly bright, so I was thinking, and I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover. Now, that puts the eighth notes as dappa dappa deepa dappa doobie dappa doobie dooba dooba deeba dappa doody yabba dootin dee yod. And that's that has kind of a moving feel to it. In other words, that's a tempo where the song's not going to stagnate. It's definitely going to have a little bit of energy. And so I'm thinking to myself, at that tempo, what do I want to do with my instrument that will really bring that out? And a good, especially for this kind of instrument, a bouzouki or an octave mandolin, a really great technique is to fill in all of the eighth notes with single note counterpoint melody. Now, that sounds really complicated, but it's basically just this kind of rhythm, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But notice I said single note, so you're not going to be sitting there going, that doesn't sound as good on this instrument. It doesn't take advantage of the unique qualities of this instrument. The unique quality of this instrument is that single notes, especially because of the double strings on each chorus, the single notes are going to sound really bright and strong and full, and the instrument has so much resonance that you don't need to strum through all 4 strings on every beat. You can really afford to play one note at a time, and as long as you're constructing your accompaniment with a chordal pattern in mind, so most of that stuff is either scalar or arpeggiated, broken chords, then it's going to still fill, the ear still hears it as a chordal progression the way that a normal, guitar strumming pattern will manifest. So that chorus, in order to construct an accompaniment for that chorus, you really have to study the melody really carefully, because when I said contrapuntal earlier, what I mean is a line on the octave mandolin or whatever instrument you're playing that interacts with the melody but is not following it exactly. So sometimes it's going to be parallel, sometimes it might cross, sometimes it might be oblique, where one voice stays the same and the other one moves, and sometimes it might be contrary, where the voices move in opposite directions. Mine ended up being mostly parallel, but I'll show you what I mean. So I started by looking at the melody of the chorus, and the chorus melody goes sol, sol, la, do, re, mi, sol, mi, re, do, re, mi, re, do, la, sol, sol. Again, that's the adapted melody that we've come up with. And so I want to identify the pillar points so that I have an idea of what chords I'm going to try to outline with my harmony. So at the beginning you have sol, sol, la, do. So you might think if it starts on a sol, it's a sol chord. Almost never is that going to be the case. You got to watch out for that. Sol to do is a very common opening motif. Dun dun dun, Star Wars, right? Here comes the bride. The first note is not the tonic. The first note is not the root of the chord. It's sol do, So do is the root, sol is actually the fifth. So don't be fooled and think you need to play a chord based on sol. Sol is the fifth, do is the root. Now there are times where you do play a chord based on sol, but not usually at the beginning of a phrase. That's very uncommon. So I hear this sol, da, da, do, and I know that's a one chord. I know that's outlining do, mi, sol, or it's implying that in some way. So I figure, while the vocal's singing the sol, I will establish that sense of the tonic by playing the one, the do. So I sol. That's the sound of me singing sol and playing do on the. So that's do. This is sol, so la, and that's a fourth. So that's a good place to start because you're setting up the sound of the chord. Now we want to add a little bit of sweetness in there. So one thing to keep in mind is that fourths, fifths, and octaves are not very sweet, but they are very functional in the sense that they set up key centers really well. So for example, do to sol is a fifth. That's going to set up the do as your key center really nicely. So when I take my octave mandolin, and if I just play two notes, do, sol, you immediately have a key center in your head, right? It's do. That's because that's just a very unique sound that really establishes the lower note of that fifth as the key center based on some harmonic series stuff that I've talked about in other videos. And similarly, the fourth is going to do the same thing but for the top note because the fourth is an inverted fifth. So if I have this, then you hear this as the tonic, right? So fourths, fifths, and octaves will be nice, stable jumping off points. To get the sweetness that you're going to want in your harmony, you need to use thirds and sixths, okay? Thirds, right? Those are thirds. Those are sixths. That's what establishes a chord as either major or minor, and those are just a little bit softer on the ear. So they create a warmth and a softness and a sense of variety that you won't get from the fifths and fourths. So when my melody goes sol, sol, la, do, I'm going to go do, re, mi in my accompaniment so that the mi lands with the do. Check it out. Da, 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 da. And you have that sweetness between the voice singing the do and the accompaniment on the mi. Fa, la, da, 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 and a fa, la, da, da, and a de, oh. Now I'm taking you through the rest of the phrase. I continue that kind of tactic through the whole phrase, but I make sure to observe the fact that by the end of the phrase, we may be moving towards a different chord. The main chord that works in opposition to the one chord is the 5 chord. That's built on the 5th scale degree, which is sol. So it's going to be sol, ti, re. Okay? It's going to be really common at the end of a phrase, especially halfway through a verse or chorus. So listen. Fa la da 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 and a fa la da da and a de. That's halfway through. Fa la da 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 and a fa la da da and a de. In this case, I decided to end both halves of the phrase identically. Oh, I forgot to say, I doubled the chorus like that. I do that phrase twice because at a faster tempo, it just went by so quickly that it was such a nice phrase that I felt like it deserved twice through. So when you arrive at the end of that phrase on sol in the melody, da 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 la sol, you might be tempted to return to a 1 chord. So you could go la sol. and I'm playing a do chord because sol is part of a do chord. So sol is one of those pivot notes where you can play a 1 chord under it because the 1 chord is do mi sol. You can also play a 5 chord, which is sol ti re. I wanted the piece to have momentum going into the next verse. The best way to create momentum is to use the 5 chord because it has a sense of being unresolved. So I chose the 5 chord for the ends of both phrases because I wanted it to feel like it's always pushing into the next verse. So I'll show you how that sounds. Fa la da 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 day and a fa la da da and a day. Oh, fa la da 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 day and a fa la da da and a day. Oh. And that little riff was mostly on the 5 chord, but do da di la la la. That's sol ti re, and then it has this little cascading scale that lands on the do, and that's the downbeat of the next verse. So that 5 chord creates the impetus that we need to get going into that second verse. So I'll show you the entire accompaniment for that chorus. It's going to be do, do, re, mi, fa, mi, fa, sol, do, la, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do, la, fa, sol. Now, obviously, I'm filling in other notes. The notes that come in between are usually just open strings. So, for example, this octave mandolin is tuned G, D, A, D, for those of you who are interested. When I fret it here, obviously the notes, or when I capo it, obviously the notes are different. At this point, it's going to be B flat, F, C, and F. But I'm going to just talk in solfege, so it just makes the whole thing simpler. So, for example, this is do, sol, and do, these open strings. So I can afford to hit those kind of openly to fill in the gaps. So hear how I'm hitting those on the offbeats. So boom, those offbeats. It's almost like using the drone string on a 5-string banjo, right? There we go. But you hear the melody there. You hear bum ba ba bum. Now, what I mean by that is not the melody of the song, but you hear the counter melody there. Dum ba 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 ba. That's the counter melody that goes against the chorus. Take a listen. Fa la da 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 day and a fa la da da and a day. Landing on that 5 chord, right? So here I'm playing sol re, sol re. That's a big old 5 chord. Fa la da 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 da. Those are sixths. The melody is re, do, re, mi, and the accompaniment is fa, mi, fa, sol. Actually, I guess technically they're thirds. They're technically thirds because my voice is actually in this range. Yeah. So I'm singing here, and the accompaniment is going. So together it sounds. So it's mostly parallel. There's one point where the voice and the octave mandolin come to a unison. Fa la da da di do di do re and a fa. Oh no, there isn't. I apologize. There used to be in my first rendition, but not in this version. Fa la da da and a day, day. Right there, yeah. Day, oh. And at the end. So those the la and the sol at the end, I do match on the bouzouki. So when you're coming up with this kind of accompaniment, you want to do a mixture of thirds and sixths versus fourths, fifths, and octaves, like I said. You also want to try to do a mixture of parallel motion versus potentially crossing the other voice, or maybe contrary, like I said before. So those are all things to keep in mind when you're coming up with this type of accompaniment yourself. And then, so I had my chorus harmonized, and I wanted a little piece that would propel me out of the chorus into the verse. And so I knew I was ending on that sol, and I knew I wanted it to be a 5 chord. But I didn't want to just fill that space with a simple, or a simple, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4. That would be, that would be the most simple option, would be to just fill the space with sort of a simple, doopy doopy pattern. Something like that. Because the piece in general is in 4/4, right? A 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. A 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, right? And then 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4. 1 and a 2 and 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. Now that's what I ended up doing. Now what on earth is that? Well, what I did was I decided to just jazz things up a little bit. I included some cells of 3. And I say cells because it's just this nice little repeating rhythm. It's 1 and 2, 3, 1 and 2, or 1 and 2, 3, 1 and 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3, and boom. So you may be wondering, what's that? What's the time signature there? There's a couple different ways you can hear that. You can actually count the whole thing in 4. So you can actually count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And it does actually land on 1. But I thought of it as being this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it was 2 3s and a 6 in my head. 2 3s and a 6 is, of course, 12, which is also 3 4s. So mathematically it works out. You can hear it as 1 and 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Or 1 and 2, 3, 1 and 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1. But it's just a little arpeggiation on the 5 chord. Played twice, that's the 2 3s. And then the same arpeggiation played again, but this time the top melody launches into a scale that has one change of direction just for interest. So instead of straight down, sorry. Actually, it has 2 changes. Up, down, up, down, right? And a little pull off, right? So this is the kind of thing I really think that all of us can do. You just have to sit down and play around with your instrument, play around with your voice. It will take practice, and it definitely will take some experimentation. And the other thing you have to do is listen to arrangements and artists and pieces that you like. And you have to figure out what they are doing and learn it and remember it and categorize it. Because all of the tricks I'm showing you, I didn't just magically come up with these one day. I've studied and heard these and remembered these kinds of things. 3 against 4, little scalar runs. Harmonizing in thirds and sixths. Different kinds of harmony, the oblique, the contrary, the parallel. All of those things are things that I've either heard other musicians doing, like on records, like Planxty, Andy Irvine, those kinds of guys, or I learned about in school. So there's this idea of, oh, these artists are just magically creative in a way that I'll never understand and I can never attain that. You need to stay away from that kind of thinking, because yes, every once in a while the world is blessed with a genius whose ideas really just can't be explained. But most of what we call, inexplicable genius is really craft. It's technique, it's craft that you can learn. So I would really encourage you guys to, find a song collection, maybe sea shanties, it could be anything really, and learn the melody and then try to come up with an accompaniment, using some of these techniques. So that was the chorus and the little riff coming out of the chorus. And then I used the same techniques for the verse. So let's get back in key. When I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover, and to the army. So let me point out one thing right there. When I was in a line like that, the melody is on sol, 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 la. Now, sol to la, in most cases, is going to be a perfect time to use the 1 chord and the 4 chord. So the sol is the 5th of the 1 chord, do, mi, sol, and the la is the 3rd of a 4 chord, which is fa, la, do. So 1 chord, 4 chord. You hear that triad? You can tell that's a chord change, right? The other pillar tone, so you have the sol, the la, sol, la. Now we land sol, mi, re. We land on a re. Re is another classic giveaway. So re, in this kind of song, you're almost always going to want to harmonize that with a 5 chord, which is sol, ti, re. So the full phrase is 1 chord, 4 chord, 1 chord, 5 chord. It's very simple. Bum, ba, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, 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 bum. I would recommend playing that progression on your instrument. So it doesn't matter what key. So let's just say it's in D. It would be D, G, D, A, and then try singing little melodies, right? So da, 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 that melody goes thrice for the verse. So now, something to keep in mind is that when you have repetition is a good thing because it draws the listener in, but you do want to introduce some element of either delayed gratification or variation. So 2 things that I did, I put a little extra beat between the second and third phrases. So just that little scale. So a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5e and a 1 and 2 and 3. It's effectively a 5th beat if you're counting those broad, large beats. Bum ba ba dee da ba do. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and a 5 and a 1 and 2 and 3. It's just a cute little space. You got to let these songs breathe. So don't feel like you need to stick to exactly, the time signature like 4 or 2 or 3. You can always add a little run or a little extra beat to give the song a little space to breathe and a little bit of variation. And then for the 4th phrase, I wanted to introduce the money chord, which is the 6th chord. Right? That's the juicy, that's the chord that has a little bit more depth of emotion rather than just when When you hit, now all of a sudden we're talking. We have a little more, a little more emotion here. So that's the La chord. So La, Do, Mi. Perfect substitute for Do. So let's say you have a cycle. You're going Do, Fa, Do, Sol, Do, Fa, Do, Sol, ding, Do, Fa, Do, Sol, La. Put the La instead of the Do on the fourth phrase. So it has this sense of, something's changing, something's happening, right? So it's like the phrase structure is A, B in terms of if we're analyzing it as like little poetic, little stanzas or lines. So A, B. Well, it's really A prime, right? The one with the little jiggity jig thing at the end. So A prime, A, B. So A prime, A, and B. And then I do the little jiggity jig thing at the end as well. So my goal with this was to take a relatively simple and honestly kind of boring melody from the book and draw out... I mean, it's not actually boring is my point. It's not actually boring. But if you just play the simplest possible chords with it, it does sound a little bit dull. So I wanted to just find the poetic structure that's actually hidden in this melody and bring it out with the accompaniment. So that's where that A prime, A, B stuff comes in. You don't want to go A. That's not going to make for a really interesting arrangement. And then I basically applied what I came up with for the verse and the chorus to the entire song, and practiced it, and there was the arrangement. And then I did a little, I played the chorus accompaniment as the intro. With the little rhythmic figure. When I was in my... Okay? So I played the chorus the chorus counter melody as the intro, so that when we get to the chorus, it sounds like, oh yeah, I feel like I kind of heard that before, but it's not exactly the same. It has this sort of reminiscent sound because you've heard the counter melody of it in the intro. So I hope you all enjoyed this journey through the arrangement, the discovery and arrangement and development of this song that I went through to put it on the album. And I hope that you all feel encouraged to potentially do something like this on your own. Of course, it'll take practice. Your first one may not be, it may not sound as good as you might hope, but the more you study these techniques and practice them and learn about them and really, notice them, especially when you're listening to music, the better luck you're going to have with your own arrangements. So, that being said, I'll give you the whole song now so you can see, if any of you want to try to learn this arrangement. It's definitely playable if any of you play this kind of instrument. And you can change the capo to suit the range of your own voice, right? So I'll give you the whole song, and then I'll let you go. All right, here goes. When I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover, and to the army I did go for to roam the world all over. I was a soldier stout One morning by the break of day, our drums did beat full order. Our ship was bound for the Indies, for to leave this lowland border. Well, it came to me a sad surprise, the tears fell down and blinded me. Our ship was bound for the Indies, for to leave my love behind me. Fa-la-da-da-da-da-da-day, and the fa-la-da-da-da-day, oh, fa-la-da-da-da-da-day, and the fa-la-da-da-da-day, oh. Well, we sailed east and we sailed west, we sailed all round the borders, but the prettiest lass that I ever did see was the one on the lowland borders. Well, we sailed east and we sailed west, the wind blew cold and dreary, but still I thought of the pretty little maid, the one I loved most dearly. Fa-la-da-da-da-da-da-day, and the fa-la-da-da-da-day, oh, fa-la-da-da-da-da-day, and the fa-la-da-da-da-day, oh. All right, folks, have a good one. See you next time. One morning by the break of day, our drums did beat full order. Our ship was bound for the Indies, for to leave this lowland border. It came to me a sad surprise.